Tell me about your vision.
My vision is for high performance leaders to find a sense of resilience in the time of chaos. This is more chaotic. I've been working in business my whole adult life. This is maybe the most chaotic I've seen it. And my vision is for executives, high performing executives and entrepreneurs to find resilience because it is on us to help lead the world.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So often when I'm working, I do a lot of coaching. And when I'm working with executives, they have this sense of the chaos like it's somehow out there. What I know from my own experience, what I know from the research is that chaos is an inside job. I do a lot of work with the work of Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And probably the most powerful line from that book is that the single greatest freedom, the one that can never be taken away from us, is the freedom to choose our attitude in any given situation. And I think for a lot of executives, they think of the chaos as somehow out there, like it's something else. It's the market, it's the current administration, it's whatever they think it might be. But in fact, chaos is an inside job. It's something that we do. And so my vision is really, how do we help high performing executives rewrite their internal narrative, come to a place of radical self-ownership, and then build teams that transform the world.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so tell me more. How did you get started on this path?
So my background is in change management. I was an IT person. I came up in the world of IT. I was an IT entrepreneur for many years. And what I noticed was that we were building the greatest systems in the world, and it really came down to people and culture, like whether they were actually going to accept the work that we were doing. And that was my transition into organizational development, organizational change. And what I realized as I grew that practice is that increasingly the limit was not even our ability to sort of communicate the right things, get the right training and out there and all that. It was often executives at the top who had gotten there by sort of scrapping and working their way up the organizational chart, but then they were experiencing scarcity and fear and just an internal disruption. And so because I was increasingly doing more and more coaching, this just seemed like a really logical place to move into, figuring out how do we actually help executives find a sense of internal calm so that they can lead their teams, they can lead their companies, lead the world, and create great products and bring great things out into the market.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, what would you say is your why or what you do?
Ask me that again. What was?
What's your why or what you do? What gets you out of bed
Mm,
every morning?
you bet. So my personal story is my why. So I'm a person in long-term recovery, and like a lot of people who struggled with addiction, I came to a place where my life just crashed around me, and I had to figure out how to rebuild my life. And what I recognized was that there was people who were willing to love me and believe in me until I could do that for myself. And I talk about this in my TEDx talk called "A Revolution of Interdependence." And so my why is saying, how do we bend human culture toward interdependence? How do we realize that as great as we all may be individually, we're far greater together? And so it comes out of my own experience, but as I've been able to bring it to clients, I've also seen some really exciting outcomes, transformed companies, better mergers. I mean, a lot of these things that we think of as very technical outcomes are often made more successful by internal transformation. So my why is my own story.
And what is your story?
Yeah. So I was the director of IT change management for one of the largest consulting firms in the world, 53,000 employees. And yet I was just miserable. I was like, this can't be what it's all supposed to be about. And so, like a lot of people with addiction issues and substance abuse issues, I continued to behave in ways that were really harming me, harming the people around me. And it wasn't until I had this moment of crash, this the complete breakdown, this bottom line moment, this rock bottom moment, that I began to say, okay, how can I rebuild? How can I pull myself back together? And my story is that a lot of that happened around the time, I was just beginning my new business. I was beginning my recovery journey right as COVID was breaking out. So not only was I sort of finding a new way to be in the world, but I was also responding to one of the most chaotic events we've had in our world over the last 100 years, which was the COVID pandemic. And so really saying, okay, starting with myself, what are the stories I'm telling myself that are getting in the way? How can I move into a place of radical self ownership? And then how can I begin to build? Well, I call it a life team, but it's simple. Like the best way to think about it is if you walked into the headquarters of Apple and Tim Cook was there to get your coffee or take your coat, you'd say, well, surely, Tim Cook, you've got something better to do. And yet, when we think of ourselves as CEOs of our own lives, we think that we're supposed to be able to do everything. The most successful among us, including Steve Jobs, figured out how to build a life team around them to help them succeed.
Yeah. So from that to where you are today, your journey as a leader, as a speaker,
Mm-hmm.
as a coach, how did all that come together? From COVID, the lessons you learned, and now we're today.
Mm-hmm. So, um, my work early on as I was building my business was largely transactional. Okay, so you're doing, I've actually done a number of mergers. So typically, big company X was buying small company Y, and they would bring in someone like me, or me in particular, to say, okay, how do we merge into a single organization? Um, and I was very good at it. Transactionally, I was successful in helping the deal makers, whether it was private equity or internal funding. I was successful in helping them build a single company out of that. But what I noticed is that kind of culture always frayed at the edges, and a lot of leaders got burned out in the process and ended up bailing altogether on the work. And so, my question was, okay, surely there's got to be a better way to lead in the world. And it began really with first some simple questions. I was working at one point with a private equity firm, and I started asking them, okay, what would make this merger more successful? Because, yeah, you're achieving your ends, you're achieving your financial goals, but clearly you're leaving money on the table in part because people feel burned out by the work. What would make that more successful? And out of that came what has become this process I call the resilience stack. I'm a former software developer, so I think in terms of stacks and developing ideas in terms of stacks, just like software. And what came out of that was this idea of the resilience stack that said, okay, how can we really work with leaders so that internal transformation becomes the way that they lead in the world, not leading from a place of authority or leading because they have the right position on the organizational chart, but leading because they have done the hard work of internal transformation. And just over time, I've been blessed to do more and more of that kind of work. I still do some very traditional organizational change work and mergers and all that, but over time, I've been blessed to do more and more of that work with executives, and increasingly now with entrepreneurs, because I think entrepreneurship is the great hope for the future. Like when I look at the chaos that's happening, not just in America but in the world generally, to me, entrepreneurs are the hope of the future. Entrepreneurs are someone who look at a problem and say, surely there's a better way to do that. And so increasingly, I'm also working with a lot more entrepreneurs and helping them think about like what kinds of products and services will leave a better world behind.
For sure. And I think it's needed. It's needed to a
Mm-hmm.
great extent. I don't know what stat I was reading, but very recently, there's a stat I was looking at where the entrepreneurship, the amount of revenue that small businesses were producing, and how many small businesses were there, and how many people were employed. I think
Mm-hmm.
most people were employed by, I think 80% of them were through small businesses in the last decade, and I think the stats today is, I think, 40% to 60%. So which has it's strategically changed, where
Mm-hmm.
now the big organizations are employing people instead of small business owners. there's a lot
Absolutely.
of change coming. There's a lot of change coming
Mhm.
through that. And you were talking about Steve Jobs. Um, in the book, I think this is, I mean, we get into a nitty gritty of stuff, I think, but Philippe mentioned in the book the way Steve Jobs went about recruiting people. He would
Mhm.
go and find A players, and he would relentlessly pursue those A players, right, to the
Mhm.
point where they're like, this guy wants this more than I do, so
Right.
they will join him. And then once he gets enough of those A players in the team, those A players only just want to work with A players. So those A players that go you have
Right.
created go find other A players to work with because they hate working with B, C, and D players. Like they're not
Mhm.
even in the calculations. So that's how he created that recruitment cycle of
Right.
things where it's 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 exponential growth when he gets those kind of leaders together in a place where you can do it, but I know he can, so I recruit that person to do it for me. So that's amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the things Steve got very good at, he wasn't good at this early in his career, but particularly in the late 90s, one of the things Steve really became exceptional at was not just recruiting A players, but recruiting A players who made up for his own weaknesses. And so one of the reasons why Tim Cook was so exceptional was because Tim Cook had this operational capacity. Steve was a genius, but had a difficult time shipping product. Tim Cook helped solve that problem. Johnny Ive had this best balance between design and production. And so he could take Steve's wild ideas and turn them into beautiful products that could actually get produced and actually shipped. And so that to me, that's a classic example of what I mean by a life team or by interdependence is when we are not just surrounding ourselves with A players, but we're surrounding ourselves with A players who help us be exceptional in the world. They fill in the spaces that we don't create.
Thank you for being here today. I'm really happy that you tuned in to Vision Pros Live. I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions as these episodes continue to move forward. This is going to get more and more fun. We'll have more and more engagement as well. We'll invite people to participate in the show. And thank you for giving us your time and attention. Have an excellent time building out your vision and becoming a Vision Pro yourself.